Keir Starmer's position on the two-child benefits cap has drawn criticism from many within his party. Their justification is the so-called fiscal responsibility and that there's no money left to remove the cap. One figure, however, from Labour's past absolutely loves it: Tony Blair.
He's being very tough with the Labour Party about spending commitments, and I think he's absolutely right. He's just saying, look, we can't, if we're saying it's as bad as it is, we can't just make unfunded promises.
So to be clear, you think he was right to say no to lifting the two-child limit on universal credit?
Well, I should imagine he, like me, is probably completely opposed to it. But the question is, can you commit that you're going, before you get in and before you see what the state of things are, can you commit to changing it? And
shouldn't he just said don't know?
No, you can never say that, I'm afraid. I mean, I can say that now because I'm not in frontline politics, but no.
Not in frontline politics, but on our bloody screens every other week. So here's what makes a brilliant Labour leader, according to Blair: immovability and toughness, and possessing the kind of eye on the prize, lack of empathy that makes it easy to abandon hungry kids. Oh yes, and not making promises you can't, or rather won't, fund. Liz Kendall, Shadow Minister for Social Care, was also on Peston, where she was asked about the two-child benefit cap too. Here's what she said.
It is extraordinary that your party, which within recent memory committed itself to abolishing child poverty, will not commit to abolish the two-child limit on these very important payments.
I think Keir was being honest with the Labour Party and, more importantly, with the public, that we will not make spending commitments, that we can't show exactly how we'll fund them, and that we can't be sure that we'll keep them. We have seen the results of that when Liz Truss made unfunding spending commitments, and it was working people who were paying the price. Because we actually believe that fiscal credibility is the rock on which we build everything else that we do. And unless we can get the economy growing again, we won't have the money to do what we want to do and what we actually did in government, which was to dramatically reduce child poverty. And let me just say this, the really big issue we face is that more than 2/3 of children growing up in poverty are in a household where at least one person works. So whereas back in 1997, we needed a floor, the minimum wage, under which people couldn't fall, but the future, we need a ladder so that people can get good jobs, better paid jobs, and that is the prize for families and the prize for tackling child poverty.
Right. So just let me get this straight. We've gone from fully costed manifestos of, this is how we're going to fund social development, this is how we're going to get you all your free broadband, to, sorry, we actually can't fund anything. Maybe vote for us. Oh, but in some time in the future, when we've achieved amazing growth, somehow, we're not going to tell you how, children can finally get a look in. No mention, of what the policies are that will achieve that growth. It's just manifesting. We're just going to manifest it. But in the meantime, let's feed those kids some fiscal credibility for breakfast. Luckily, there was one person talking sense on that show, though perhaps too much sense to keep belonging to the Labour Party, it seems. This was Jeremy Corbyn's view on Starmer's approach to the two-child limit.
He's wrong. The two-child limit is cruel, impoverishes families of 3 or more children. To abolish it would cost about £1 billion a year.
1.4, I think the IMF.
1.4. Yeah. Not very much when you look at all the other issues in public spending, but the massive improvement it would make in the lives of those families, in the lives of those children, and I see it as an investment for the future and a big step towards ending child poverty. I just think it's a big mistake to rule it out.
I mean, his view is winning an election is more important than anything else. And in order to be confident of that, he has got to show that, quotes, he's a safe pair of hands with the economy. Is that a misjudgment?
There's a very strange supposition that you can't win the election because you promise to try and do something to end child poverty. Poor people have votes as well, Those families have got votes as well. Their relatives have got votes as well. And if they are struggling, and I know plenty of families in my own community who 3 or 4, 5 children in some cases, are really struggling, and they would look askance at a Labour proposal which says, well, sorry, your problem, your fault.
Starmer's Labour Party loves to talk about avoiding unfunded spending, but you can, fund that spending. See how Corbyn describes children as an investment. That gives a clue to one route. Borrowing. There is no better infrastructure to invest in than tomorrow's people, and that is growth. But there's also another way of funding it, and Corbyn dropped a hint when the discussion moved back to Tony Blair.
One of the statements that Blair made was that...
What, today?
Today, just now to me in this interview. I mean, he said that the burden of tax in this country is too high and that we're already spending too much on public services.
Well, it's a very odd thing for him to say, but then he is a very wealthy man, so maybe he would be worried about taxes.
Ooh! Still got it. What a radical idea, though. Imagine taxing wealthy millionaires like Tony Blair and getting kids out of poverty. Unfortunately, the Labour Party doesn't want to talk about the range of economic choices available to them. And it's about more than just the two-child benefit cap. The Times reported that fiscal discipline is going to trump reversing any Tory welfare cuts. Senior Labour figures have been doing the media rounds and briefing the papers that, don't worry, these overwhelmingly popular positions, such as starving children, will continue. Why? Because the grown-ups are in charge now and they are committed to rehashing the same financial rhetoric that gave us austerity for a decade. Yay! And expanding on the two-child benefit cap, an ally of Starmer told The Times this. There will be more of these to come. It was this issue this week, and it will be something else somewhere else down the line. It's important that people understand that. You can't on one hand say fiscal responsibility is crucial and on the other hand come up with a load of unfunded commitments. The thing Keir wants to do now, this has started, is be absolutely clear that people have got to get their heads around this. I guess that means we're going to be stuck with the overall benefits cap that robs people of their entitlements, the bedroom tax and benefit sanctions. Just what you always dreamed of from a Labour government. Rivka, why does Keir Starmer suddenly think that adopting George Osborne's fiscal ideology is an election winner?
Well, Moya, it beats me. I'm old enough to remember when 11 million people had their wages paid by the government for over a year. We know, and, it only happened like bloody yesterday, that the state served people when it needed it the most. We know what's possible, but somehow our elites are now telling us that things are not possible again and we need to manage our expectations. As Corbyn points out, this is partly a very selfish thing. Tony Blair doesn't want a tax on millionaires, despite the fact that the majority of the British public does. Something like 51% of the British public wants a tax on millionaires, of whom there are over 2 million in this country, almost 3 million millionaires in the UK. 3/4 of people want taxes specifically on millionaires to be increased, like half taxes generally to be increased. So Tony Blair's speaking really for a minority, mostly for himself when he says that this isn't realistic. We know that it is. Also, again, not to continue my European sort of analogies and comparisons, but, look at Europe. We have the Spanish left-wing platform Sumar about to run on Sunday on a platform that includes giving every 18-year-old in the country 20,000 euros as a universal inheritance. How are they going to fund it? By making the emergency wealth tax that they introduced during the pandemic, which, by the way, a vast majority of British people would support in this country, permanent. We know that we can fund these things. We know that there is the money. And I think that this is Keir Starmer living once again in a world of sort of think tank gurus and consultants and people like Tony Blair, quite frankly, who are so out of touch with what the public wants and knows is possible. They received furlough payments. They've received help from the government in unimaginable sort of proportions in the recent past. And so, he's in a kind of policy bubble, in a sort of centrist bubble, while the rest of us know what's possible.